Hi, everybody. This is Mary Hollywood at the Crossroads. Thank you so much for meeting with us here once again. And today we have a very special episode with a guest. Jesse Crall is joining us. And Jesse I wanted to have him on the show eventually. He was a fundamental piece for a lot of us throughout this primary season in order to understand Medicare for all. A lot of us started off being, favoring, everybody wants universal health care, but we were all like, okay, a public option, why not? It works for everybody. Until, Jesse was, I said, like a key person that took the time to really break down the information and the numbers so that we could understand why Medicare for all was the better option for us moving forward. And here at the Crossroads, one of the biggest points that I'm trying to explain to people is this miscommunication that we have. It's like everybody thinks that their idea is the best one, is the right one, and nobody sees the other person, where they're coming from. So I definitely want to open up this dialogue so that more people can have different narratives, different kinds of information, so that we can make better decisions. So I want to start off with Jesse. There was a poll that came out yesterday or before yesterday saying that the majority of Americans now support Medicare for all. And 49 or 46% of those are Republicans. And immediate, I was like, oh my God, if we are a representative democracy, then there's definitely something wrong with this representation. Because why aren't these elected officials fighting for this bill?
It's really about the money spent by these health insurance companies, by private equity, by the pharmaceutical companies on lobbying, hundreds of millions of dollars every year. I think $100 million from insurance and $300 million from big pharma, designed to protect the profits of their executives. It's not that, we're seeing politicians who maybe have a different way of getting us to the same path. The issue is they're bought. And so something like Medicare for all, which would provide universal coverage, which would cut healthcare spending overall, which would help to create an easier system through which to access care, is being denied simply because it would break down the private insurance industry. And with public options, one of the problems with public options is it has no real plan for any kind of rational transition. So there was this kind of narrative that Medicare for all was the chaotic option and that the public option was the safer choice. But, Medicare for all at least breaks down the insurance industry in an orderly way across 4 years, provides just transition for workers. Public option doesn't do that. You can have massive job loss in some aspects. Some healthcare companies can go under. Other healthcare companies could monopolize and expand. There's going to be a lot of job redundancies there with no one to take care of them. Mm-hmm. So the narrative really was warped, and it was an issue of money in politics. It was that simple.
Yeah, and that's a huge issue. And it was one of the first things that made me stop, because I was always like, it's going to be crazy all of a sudden, change the entire system. And when you explain, hey, stop and think about it. So we're going to have 4 years to do this. So we know exactly the amount of time that we have to phase everybody out and into the new system. So that was a huge point. And I was like, nobody says this. It's never clear.
It's one of the examples of how the conversation was so warped, because I think one of the entirely valid arguments against Medicare for all would have been, what about people who work in the insurance industry? Not executives making millions of dollars, but just ordinary people making 40, 50 grand a year, answering phones, going over plans. And even public option advocates were talking about that. That wasn't a line of attack. It wasn't like Pete Buttigieg was showing immense concern for employees in the insurance industry. Mm-hmm. And that's when you kind of know, okay, they're not even focusing on the real issues. They're just focusing on those corporate profits. Exactly. And so when Bernie Sanders began talking about this just transition, it shows that he really had to focus on greater issues beyond just medical coverage. When you think about a city like Pittsburgh, huge insurance city, I think, I can't even remember what the number is, but 100,000, 200,000 people in that area are involved in health insurance or something, some astronomical number. Well, if you have a public option and there are monopolies that are built from insurance companies, and a lot of people start getting laid off randomly, and there's no just transition. You have a city, you have a region that could be absolutely economically devastated, and that has consequences for their health, their happiness, the stability of the region. It has political consequences as well. If a Democrat destroys a region, you're not going to have Democrats winning in Pennsylvania for a while. So
Absolutely.
my attitude with the public option wasn't that it was a worthwhile step forward and we can do better. My attitude with the public option is that might take us backwards in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
It's dangerous. It's going to raise, it could potentially raise costs of spending, healthcare spending overall. And when you expend this much political capital, that was the number one issue this primary season was healthcare. All the talk, half an hour, every debate led off with healthcare. If you don't deliver a strong plan, if you deliver something that is chaotic, that causes job loss, that doesn't cut costs, that's difficult to use, you're telling people that big government or big government plans do not work. And that creates a cynicism, and it makes it harder down the road to enact a Green New Deal or Medicare for all or an infrastructure program. It's a problem.
Absolutely. And that's, now that you brought up big government, how can we trust a corrupt government to control the nation's healthcare system? And this is something that was always on my mind. Like, okay, this would be great, but am I gonna be comfortable with the government taking care of the whole thing?
I'm sympathetic to that. We see that the government is not working. We've been let down by Democratic administrations, Republican, in terms of domestic issues and foreign policy. What I like about Medicare for All, though, is it's not a big bureaucratic system.
Yeah.
It's not as though they're trying to manage your healthcare itself. They're simply picking up the bill from you going to the doctor. So that's all private. You call a doctor, you call a therapist, you call whatever, you go, they send the bill to the government pays that bill. So all you're really relying on from the government is the ability to keep paying the bills, which means they have to be upfront about higher taxes, and that's a political argument. But when you get rid of private insurance entirely, you don't have this situation in which affluent people can always rely on the private market, and so they can keep defunding the public programs. And that's what would happen with a public option. You would have the poorer, sicker, more vulnerable people on the public option, and there would always be this political football with people arguing, let's defund that, let's cut budgeting, and all the more affluent people could stay in the private sector where everything would be fine. With Medicare for All, even wealthy, Republican, plutocrat, whoever, they would all be entirely reliant on this program. So it would be much harder for politicians to defund it. They would be much more beholden to the taxpayers because everyone would be aligned under this single plan. So I think that should alleviate some fears, I hope.
Absolutely. It did for me. And then the other idea, which it wasn't a fear, it's more of an idea that I think that is so ingrained into American culture, is the idea of choice, right? As great as Medicare for All is, and as awful as insurance companies could be, people would rather have the option to choose. And this was something that I battled with a lot, because I do feel like people deserve a choice. But then again, I started thinking about it, and I'm like, do I want a choice to be insured by many different companies that are going to deny the care that I need whenever comes a time for me to need it? It's a false choice.
I mean, former Vice President of Cigna, Wendell Potter, was a whistleblower. He's been on Twitter, and he's made a number of on news shows, and he's talked about how that was a deliberate talking point created by the insurance industries. So what you're really choosing is a low deductible but higher premiums, or lower premiums and a higher deductible. In terms of your ability to access actual care, it's very widespread. Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All plan expands benefits to include dental and long-term care and mental health, and you would still be allowed to buy private insurance for anything that isn't covered. So if there's some compromise, the government won't approve mental health care for some reason, you would still be able to access insurance for anything that isn't under Medicare for All. So you would really just have the choice to see whatever doctor you wanted. It would be entirely affordable for every American. And this idea of choosing between health insurance plans is really just, as you said, a false choice, because we want to choose our doctor. We don't want to choose a plan that costs us money that we can't necessarily afford.
Absolutely. And I think something that sadly, because it was through this pandemic but it has, shattered the argument too about being the tie-in between employment and health insurance. That's completely out the window.
One of the funny things is that was such a big talking point. Amy
Mm-hmm.
Klobuchar, you're going to take all this, the insurance away from the unions. And what was in the Medicare for All bill was a provision that any money saved by employers by having their employees go on to Medicare for All would have to be paid out to the workers. Now, the average employer insurance plan costs something like $6,000 or $7,000 a year. So under Medicare for All, not only would every worker in America have free, expansive insurance, but they'd get a $7,000 raise. None of the public option plans promised anything close to that.
Absolutely.
So you had this bizarre talk about how somehow Medicare for All was anti-union or anti-worker, when in reality it was the complete opposite.
This, to me, was a huge turning point in my support for Bernie Sanders. I wasn't a supporter of his originally, right? I grew into becoming his supporter. And at the Nevada caucus, I don't know if you remember, probably that past week, the Culinary Union, they went on this thing talking badly about Medicare for All and, that whole thing. And I was thinking at that time, because I also sometimes I have some issues with unions that I feel that they become another form of concentrated power, but that's another story.
No, they can be. Yeah, that's true.
And I was like, okay, well, there we go. But that Saturday, when people showed up to vote, all those workers voted for Bernie. And exactly. I was like, that's it. Like, to me, that was proof that, it's what's right for the people, everyone.
Yeah, and there are a lot of people who are union leaders whose sole job or whose primary job is to negotiate benefits, and that can be lucrative. So when you take away healthcare out of the equation, suddenly their role is diminished. So I think there was a degree of corruption, and fortunately, as you said, the workers, they saw through it. So good on them.
Yes, I was so happy when I saw that. And then I was like, okay, I feel like I can support this like wholeheartedly now.
Yeah. But again, that was something, it wasn't in the initial bill. That was something that was a provision put in through dialogues with unions. And so it's not as though you can't criticize these bills or you can't want them to improve. There's always rooms for improvement. But are you trying to make improvements for the benefit of as many Americans as you can, or are you making improvements for the benefit of your donors? Absolutely. And that's what kind of warps our dialogue a lot of the time.
Yeah. And something else that I hadn't thought about before, but something happened to me personally, my family. My husband has been suffering from a lung condition for over 10 years. And literally for 10 years, he's been trying to go to different doctors, and he was always treated so badly, really poorly, because we didn't have insurance. So it was always like we had like the minimal coverage. And it's always like nobody really paid attention to him or believed him. And it took this pandemic of like a respiratory condition to finally somebody listened to him. And he finally was able to see a lung specialist. And I was thinking, imagine if doctors didn't have to think about the patient's condition to pay for his treatment. Because I feel like a lot of doctors feel like, oh, I'm going to send you to this and you're not going to be able to pay. You're not going to have insurance cover it. You're going to get denied. And I feel like a lot of times people don't get the treatment they need because there's this burden of like insurance in the middle. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's all it is. It's a middleman keeping you from getting the direct care you need. And even among people who are insured, it's absurd that there's gold coverage, silver coverage, bronze coverage.
Yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, it's not like we're flying an airplane where everyone ends up at the same destination, regardless of which class you're sitting in. We're talking about your ability to, as you said, access specialists for, congenital conditions and for life-threatening conditions. We talk about how a dictator in a foreign country might be a madman for killing 10,000 of their own people. Well, we have 68,000 people dying every year because we don't have a strong universal coverage program. I mean, that's absurd.
Yeah, it's insane. So now the question is that it's on everyone's mind. What do we do going forward when we have probably maybe Biden, who knows what's going to happen there, that just said today, healthcare is a human right, but
Yeah.
he himself doesn't support Medicare for all. What can we do you feel?
I mean, it's so strange. My perception was if Bernie Sanders was the nominee, he
Mhm.
would have to go on essentially a major media blitz. He would have to partner up with like-minded people in the Senate, Tammy Baldwin, hopefully Elizabeth Warren, who knows,
Mhm.
members of Congress who are supportive of single payer, and simply basically travel the country. Every news station, Fox, MSNBC, CNN, videos, tweets, calling out people opposed, going to rallies, playing hardball behind closed doors
Mhm.
to members of Congress and the Senate who wouldn't be willing to pass single payer, essentially getting the country on your side. With Biden in charge, who knows? And with COVID-19, you're going to have a more receptive population, and maybe we'll get it through the worst possible conditions of a health pandemic.
Mhm.
I mean, that's not how I wanted single payer to come, but
Yeah.
people have to stay motivated. It's going to have to be an issue where people don't let the end of this crisis diminish their need and will
Mhm.
for healthcare reform. I mean, Joe Biden is going to throw out small crumbs. He's going to try to lower the Medicare
Mhm.
age, or expand Medicaid, or
Yeah.
come up with a public option that actually just empowers the biggest insurance companies and try to pretend that that's better. And it's really going to have to be up to people like Bernie Sanders or AOC, ideally people in the news media, although good luck, who are willing to see through the facade and see through the spin and really deliver a
Mhm.
direct message to the American people about why this is so important.
Yeah. So what I hope is that, there are more people like you who, because I feel like my issue was from the get-go is that a lot of the Sanders supporters, they would just, if somebody threw any doubt at Medicare for all, instead of trying to, educate and explain, it was more of like, you're killing 68,000 people. And like, it really, that just pushes a lot of people away, and it gets them, because I think, man, if you just stop and listen to MSM for one night, I mean, they're so warped in their narrative and how they talk about Medicare for all. You would think is the worst thing that would ever happen. You know what I mean? So
Well, you look at somebody, I don't know if you know Andy Slavitt.
yeah.
Yeah, he was a big, for listeners, he was a big part of Obamacare, and he's
Hmm.
making the rounds talking about the pandemic and health coverage today. And he is someone who says, I'm not against Medicare for all. I just think there's a lot of different pathways to get there. The
Yeah.
problem with Andy Slavitt is he was someone who had a health company. He sold it to United Health, one of the largest insurers. He personally made millions of dollars doing it. And he's someone who is on the board of a company called the United States of Care, designed to provide healthcare solutions with a number of Goldman Sachs executives, Bill Frist, a big former Republican politician. And so he comes on as this very neutral figure trying to find the best solution for Americans to get covered. But in reality, he's someone who owes a lot of his money and a lot of his power to the insurance industry.
Hmm.
So the people who are supposedly neutral delivery systems for our news are anything but, and it does warp people.
Yeah.
So if you're in my position, you're trying to bring people onto your side, you have to recognize the difference between who is actively working against your interests because they have a financial stake, and who are people like you who are just trying to get the truth. You have no personal investment in the riches of the insurance industry. You're just trying to figure out what's best. And so, being more understanding and recognizing how detrimental our news media is, and trying to sort of navigate that in a way that is more open in
Yeah.
terms of dialogue, as opposed to just being direct and saying, no, you want these people to die because you don't support Medicare for all. That's
Yeah.
not helpful at all.
Right. So hopefully to better communication moving forward. I think that we have everything on our side now. Unfortunately, it's a sad situation, but we can do the best to, benefit everybody in the end. And I want to know, have you given any more thought about running for Congress?
I have, yeah, probably in the 30th district. I'm looking. What I end up running on depends on who's president, who I'm
Mhm.
running
Right.
against, what the issues are. We might have Medicare for all and a Green New Deal by this time next year, because the world's going to collapse otherwise. Who knows?
Right.
But I'm strongly considering it, because I saw my Congress let me down during the bailout. I saw the
Mhm.
Democratic Party let a lot of us down during the primary. I'm
Mhm.
seeing that we're not getting the leadership we need. Even well-intentioned members of Congress are being overwhelmed by the corporatist forces, and it's dangerous. And I think there needs to be there need to be people in Congress who are willing to be disliked, frankly, by the party
Mhm.
establishment, even if,
Absolutely.
if that's what it takes to get people to really see the problems in our political system.
Awesome. You have a lot of support already.
Thank you.
So we look forward to you running and more people like you running, hopefully, as well.
Are you interested in something like that? Running, volunteering, working on campaigns?
Um, Definitely not running, but working to help those that do want to run.
Good.
Yeah, right now I have small children, so I want to take care of this phase of my life, make sure that they're, well off. But then definitely get in there, get in the fight. I think we need the truth, like we need neutrality. I hate these biased media and everybody's just bought off and, sold off. So we need to just independent thinking and the good for all.
I agree completely. I don't even watch cable news anymore
Me
because
either.
there's no value to it beyond seeing how you can be warped by what people think is a conservative mindset or what people think is a liberal mindset. In reality, it's just an elite mindset trying to preserve power.
But what I don't forget is that millions of people do watch still, and they do rely on it and they believe it, which
Yeah.
is the worst of all. So we have to, with everything that I try to, whenever I talk to someone, I always take into consideration where they're coming from. Like, what is that, their state of mind, and what is their situation, so that we can find that little spot, where we can meet at that crossroads and find something, the common ground, and say, hey, it's not exactly like this. Like, have you thought about this? Because it's the only way, you know what I mean, to try to garner some support and unity, which is,
The number of people in this country who are actively trying to preserve immense amounts of power and wealth at the expense of other people is very, very small.
yeah.
Most of us are misguided, or we've been propagandized, or we're
Mhm.
just angry or cynical or out of the picture. I mean, and those are people who we should be able to reach, because I think most people are fundamentally decent. They want what is
Mm,
best for as many of us as possible. So
yeah.
I have hope, but we definitely do have to get through a major fog of propaganda in order to reach that point.
Yeah.
So that's the challenge.
It's not going to be easy, but I think that we can never give up. We just have to
No,
keep trying, right?
absolutely.
All right. Well, that's it for today.
All
So
right.
I hope that you guys meet us again at the Crossroads.
Thanks for having me on.
In Hollywood, everything is good.